Okay, I'd like to ask Brent and Bernie to come down. They will be respondents to one another. Of course, I'll step in if it's not orderly.
Yeah, of course. So
oh wait, you can use.
Are they both on?
Yeah.
Is this one on? Yes. So based on my tech deterministic, oh yes, give everybody broadband and we'll get more articles argument, which I'm not really sure is guaranteed, and in light of some of the discussions in the previous part of the session, my question to you is, so what if there's this diversity argument? How much of that is actually because of value diversity, fundamental differences between the languages, and how much of it is just a waiting game, that we're just waiting for people to get online and waiting for them to participate?
It's a great question, Bernie. I think I could flip it, maybe give you a chance to answer it as well. I mean, both of our work speaks to that. A quick data point, a slide I didn't show, but is pretty interesting. I ran the exact same studies on 2012 data as I did on 2008 data, and it turns out the percentages are almost identical, 77%, 29, 28%, these types of things. So the smaller language editions have grown quite a bit, but the larger language editions have grown as well.
Also grown, yeah.
Right, so it seems to be, as of right now, the closest thing I have to a law coming from this line of research, right? This seems to be the distribution that has stuck, at least for a long time. We've thought a lot about whether, so let me change your question a bit to what a computer scientist often does, which is think about applied implications. If we could have a direct translation of all articles in English, just dumped, a perfect translation, dumped into, say, I don't know.
Volapük.
Yeah, Volapük or Swahili or whatnot, would that be a good thing? One answer is yes, and the other answer is no. Yes, because there would be many use cases where this would help people. There's no doubt about that. No, because it is not culturally contextualized sufficiently for many other use cases. So let's say chocolate, for instance, right? The English article about chocolate talks about Cadbury. It talks about Hershey, right? But in the places that speak Swahili, those brands might not be as prominent, right? There are other brands that are important. And that applies to almost every single concept. So an example that comes to mind is the article on psychology in Spanish. There's a whole section on psychology in Latin America. It's like, if that were dumped into Swahili, people would think, like, what?
Why?
Why, yeah. Latin America must be really important to psychology, which, I'm sure it's important, but not maybe as much as it would seem by just having an article about Latin America. So I'll stop now.
Do you want to ask me, or I can follow up on that?
Yeah. Well, let me actually ask you a separate question. This might be a fun discussion.
You let us know when we're done here, and we go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we should go outside and continue. So the Wikipedia crowdsourcing model, the peer production model, does it work for describing all geographic content in a perfect world?
What is a perfect world?
I'll let you define it.
Oh, yeah. One of the key problems that we had come up again and again from Wikipedians themselves about sources was a lack of state-based statistics. That the perfect world in this case is one in which there is an official third party that they can point to. That what we think of as a crowdsourcing model, there's a lot of virtuous work out there. I think some of my favorite is work in India, where people are using GPS foot traffic to create Google Maps type or OpenStreetMap type things where it wasn't there before. And if you just use the foot traffic, you can see here's where all the houses are in the shanty towns and so forth. But that won't, maybe it'll work for OpenStreetMap, but it wouldn't work for Wikipedia because of its need to be encyclopedic. And in this case, not every state has the same level of sort of clarity and precision. Germany was one of the first places that had a ton of geographic articles, and that's because their Bureau of Labor Statistics or Office of National Statistics provided very useful, machine-readable gazetteers, which in a way became its own problem, because then there were a lot of articles that were just dumped by someone who would go and take all of the articles, write a script, and that script would automatically make a new article for each town and each hamlet or hill or whatever. But then that became its own problem, because every town, the person from that town then was robbed the joy of being the one who created that article, and were afraid to put in some other data in that article. So there was a little ambiguity there. First you have on one side, every little town in England has its own geographic article, but so many of them are stubs, and no one knows where to edit in. And on the other side, people just desperate for gazetteers and other place name markers in order to put that in. So, I mean, I don't think a crowdsourced model is a bad idea, but I do think for geographic places where we can point to one thing in one place, that some form of external, credible source is ideal. Now, the question is, can we have one external source that's credible and ideal? So we went to the most placid and benign place in the world to find that out by asking people in the Middle East. And we've got all sorts of, we've got all sorts of discussions about, say, the Golan Heights or certain areas of Palestine where there is nowhere where everybody can say, this place belongs here, belongs to these people now. Even the site itself changes, but not that. Who is the Golan Heights? Who is responsible? It's a sort of an area in between Syria and Israel. Is it Syria?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. It was. And because it's contested and it moves borders, who's responsible for the population of this place? And we'd say, well, let the crowd do it. Well, you really want a third party. Who is that third party going to be? And if we can't trust the state to be a strong actor in this, we're going to then give it to the crowd. And what's the crowd going to do? The crowd is just going to fight over this, and it's going to be contentious. And then it's going to be let the one with the most emotional fortitude win, not the one with the best statistics, or even the one who's ostensibly correct, but the one who can just keep hammering at those reverts until they win.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, Bernie. And I think one reason I like your work is it speaks to a question that just keeps coming into my mind. Is this model works in a lot of places and for a lot of concepts, but I think there are some contexts where it just won't work. So when the raw statistics are variable, the Wikipedia model, I think, as of right now, just doesn't work. You mentioned rural regions. We have some work going on right now I'm pretty excited about that shows that articles about rural regions are just worse because for every town of 10, right, we have to have that town support, if we want good local information, right, those 10 people are responsible for providing it, whereas in New York, right, that's much easier. It's a structural barrier to this crowdsourcing model. Broadband's another one. You need broadband, but that's partly because of the tools, right? It's a much more friendly desktop editing environment, right, Wikipedia. So these questions, essentially, what essentially are structural barriers and what can be more easily changed maybe through community dynamics, right? I think are central to the next 5 years of Wikipedia research.
So I guess this is one for you as a computer scientist. I suppose to leave there, but it's one that came up in a number of talks already today. Fabian there was used this word. We all sort of mumbled it. Operationalization. Yeah.
Which is tough. That's a tough word to operationalize. So we learned that.
It's ironic. I know. It's like erudite. Yes. I like that word. Only someone who is erudite, which means wordy, would use the word erudite. Yeah. Can we operationalize, not just like, not trying to operationalize culture. I mean, admirable job. We know it's going to be tough. We know there are people spending their lives doing it, trying to say what is culture, volumes, books will be written about it. But can we at least operationalize those sites of contention where we can say some things are more contentious and some things are less contentious to guide people to those places? Omnipedia to me seems like one route to these affordances, to some sort of cues of what is operationalized as a contentious spot versus what's kind of tame and benign where we can do that. But can we get at least that far?
Yeah, so there, and anytime, I was actually just having this conversation with a lawyer. It was an interesting conversation. She was talking about witnesses being unreliable, and she was saying, "Oh, but your hard statistics, those are the truth." I'm like, well, we have to have a conversation about that. So there's always downsides, but yeah, and as a computer scientist, I'm a fan of numbers. I think we're not even close to the end of where numbers can take us. So with Omnipedia, for instance, one reason we're excited about releasing it is we're excited about seeing what people look up. So we did a user study and brought people into a lab, and in terms of people look up sites of what they believe to be potential contention, right? And that's an interesting statistic. I think it'd be quite valuable. The study was in Northwestern University where I did my PhD. 25% Jewish population. I'm one of them, and I had this instinct too. Look up World War II and look at Germany. Do they leave things out? Well, in fact, the German Wikipedia has a great deal more detail in some cases than the English Wikipedia, and that's such an interesting learning, right?
Yeah.
So that measuring that process, right? You can see how long people spend on things. And that gives us a new sense of contention, right? In terms of language diversity, some of the stuff that Fabian was talking about, right? Those are metrics of differences between the language editions. You can measure edit war, you can detect edit wars pretty easily. And then lastly, more generally, even for folks in the audience who are humanities oriented, machine learning is getting so good that if you as a human being can say, this is this, this is this, this is this, it's worth giving machine learning a shot to see if it can do that at scale. Yeah, so Google just open sourced some of its machine learning. It's deep learning. Yeah, it's a deep learning blockchain, Insta whatever, right? Yeah, but
as a service.
In this case, that's a pretty serious thing. Get someone, it doesn't take a master's student in computer science. Get them over and say what you want to do, and they might be able to help you out. So numbers are scary, and numbers have limitations. But we're not even close to where numbers can take us in this domain, I think. Yeah.